If you were tasked with creating the least effective program for calisthenics, what would it look like?
So the big three are volume, intensity, and frequency. Volume, we need to keep it under maintenance volume, so that for most things it lays at 2 to 4 sets for most exercises, so no more than 1 to 2 sets. Intensity, keep at least 5 reps in reserve. The more, the better. And
most people are doing that already in gyms, will say that.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, frequency-wise, nothing above once per week, because otherwise we could risk making some progress. A few more things maybe. No progressive overload. Not in reps, not in sets, not in hold time, weight or variation. Specificity-wise, random TikTok challenges, random influencer circuits, always awesome. Changing the program every week, otherwise it would get boring. But it can't be harder than the week before. So always prioritizing what looks cool over what works. And maybe for Calis in particular, I'd make sure that no matter what we're doing, we use super fat bands. So we get the feeling, hey, we're actually achieving something while we're actually not. And no regards towards activation or form. We can kick, we can compensate. We don't film ourselves. I think that way you will make sure that you won't see any progress at all. And if you do, make sure to change the program right away.
All right, guys, podcast over. That is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. And I'll just add to that. I love that list, Denis, including in a lack of consistency, because we can talk about all these complicated training variables of how do we manipulate intensity, volume, exercise selection. But if you're not consistently working out multiple times per week, and you have these periods where you're inspired to do calisthenics, you do it for a month, you take 2 weeks off. You go for another month, you take 2 weeks off. It's almost null and void any advice that you hear that is really specific if you're not taking care of these really big rocks.
Exactly. So yeah, making sure just to get to the gym, to do the things, to not push too hard, but push hard enough, and getting your sleep in as well as your nutrition in. Maybe these 2 points, super important as well. If you're sleeping 4 hours a night, you can work with the most optimal program on the planet. You won't make any progress. So yeah.
You spoke there about using a ton of band assistance for calisthenics moves, and this is something that's often recommended for beginners. Why is this not a road to success?
The thing with bands is always a tiny bit complicated. So there's like not an answer that fits everything. After a certain strength, so if you take loop bands that are way too strong, they will alter the movement that you're actually doing. So your center of gravity will completely change. The way you activate will completely change. So you won't, maybe in planche, be able to actually push the hips down correctly. Or it takes away the most important element from a movement like the front lever if you put it under the hips or under the glutes, and it helps you way too much. It makes the exercise almost completely useless because the stimulus is not specific anymore. While light loop bands, for example, can be extremely useful to gap bridges, to understand movements. So it's not that bands are bad or bands are good. They are a tool in your toolbox, and you need to know when you're using them and how to use them correctly for you to actually make progress and not just simply wasting time or boosting your ego.
That's a great answer, because it's not as if bands are completely useless. It's just you need to use them tactically, and erring on the side of less is more tends to be a good practical strategy for people to go with. If you're using a band so that you can suddenly unlock handstand push-ups as a dynamic exercise, a lot of limitations there in terms of changing the strength curve of the exercise. You're not fully overloading the prime movers as intended for that specific exercise. As well as if you use it on a planche, and you can only hold a tuck planche on the floor, but you're using bands and you're beasting out in a full planche, there's a massive disconnect there between your real strength and what the band is faking.
And yeah, I feel like handstand push-up is a good point. I've had some discussions about that in the past. I feel the biggest problem with the band in the handstand push-up is that it actually takes away the whole balance element. It really helps you to balance, and for many people, strength isn't the problem in the handstand push-up. If they struggled with learning a handstand balance-wise, and now they're learning the handstand push-up, the limiting factor won't be their front delts if we know that we're strong enough. It will be actually balancing the eccentric and the concentric in the handstand push-up. And the bands will take away this extremely important element, which usually is the limiting factor for most people to achieve that skill.
That's a fantastic observation, because on the surface, you look at that and think, oh, bands decrease my body weight on a handstand push-up. It's easier because I'm not pushing as much of my body weight. But one of the major areas there is that it's guiding the actual exercise. You're getting that stability in addition to some of that weight offsetting.
Yeah.
Now, people do want to achieve these advanced skills, but knowing if you're strong enough to do them is a whole other story. There's not really much information online. If I do X, or I can achieve X level of strength, I am in a good position to train strength skills. So, complicated topic, but if you could talk me through some basic goals that people can have for weighted calisthenics and also traditional weightlifting movements to give them a good base to work on harder stuff.
So I think we come from a time where training basics was everything. So when we started out, it was like you do 2 years of pull-ups, push-ups, handstand push-ups, nothing else. Like you can't even think of skills. I feel like the sport later evolved, especially when people started doing a lot of dynamics, into like only skills. Nobody actually needs the basics. Specificity is where it's at, extremely skill based. And I feel like with like many things, the answer actually does lay somewhere in the middle. And my approach has changed over the years. So the plans I was writing 8 years ago look completely different from what I'm doing now. And I feel like a mixed approach is where it's at, and it's a good sweet spot. So the big caveat here is, what are actually the skills that you want to be working on? Because it's difficult. And as I said, when you go online, you often see numbers. I personally don't like giving numbers because I've seen so many changes between people. Like there's always a Gaussian curve, there's always an average, but very often you see these like 240 push-ups and 20 pull-ups, for example, before you start working on planche or whatever. And I do generally like to disagree with that. I understand that it makes sure that you have somewhat a decent base, especially when you're like selling a program and you want to be sure that people have this strength. But I feel like that, especially in these high rep ranges that are often given, it's so specific to the higher rep range itself. I feel like a 6 to 9 weighted push-up has a bigger meaning. And some people would simply get stuck at 18 reps of push-ups because of lack that threshold and not because of neuronal or muscular strength development. So I like to approach it like this. If you can do a movement like a push-up in a 9 to 12 rep range, maybe weighted with a few kgs. You maybe can't even pike push-up, but you can already press a few kgs overhead for reps, and you can do a straight arm plank. And you know what your scapulas are doing. Well, you're actually already ready to start training planche. And this doesn't mean that I'll take you and I'll let you do infinite volumes of tuck planches until you like either make it or break it. No, it simply means that in a first part of the workout, you will be doing straight arm planks where you understand what the scapula is doing, elevation, depression, adduction, abduction. You get a feeling for these activations. You get a feeling for this movement. You understand the movement. The front delt, which probably will be much stronger than your shoulder, girdle, and stabilizing structures at that point. We keep working on that with easier, more objective and more measurable exercises like a dumbbell military press, later pike push-ups, military press, whatever it is. With stronger delts, you will be able to lean slightly more. And this means it's not one or the other. They will both evolve at their own pace. And let's say if you've done years of basics, of course, your margin to get better in the planche will be higher. So it's going to be easier for you to progress in planche. The only thing is what tends to happen there is you might have extremely developed front delts, but you have never learned to activate your shoulder girdle correctly. Maybe you've trained a lot of biceps and your biceps is super shortened and you're not used to stressing it in an elongated position. So it still means that you will need to have to do the work that you were doing anyway, you know? Like the limiting factor won't be your front delt, it will be your biceps. And what people tend to do in those cases is they want to rush the process because the shoulder is so much stronger, the discrepancy between the two. Short biceps and front delt is way higher, and the risk of injury through that is higher because, of course, ego's there. I am strong, I can do that, and I push myself, I push the progressions, and I might risk hurting myself in the process.
Sorry for everyone listening that was hoping for a really clear cut, do this many reps, have this much percent body weight on weighted calisthenics. I'm in the same camp as you, Denis. It's unfortunately and fortunately with calisthenics, it's not that straightforward. It's not that linear. But a theme that comes out from what you just told me is the value of specificity, especially when it comes to strength. And we're going to dive deeper into this in our conversation today. But as long as if you have at least a basic level of foundation on pull-ups, push-ups, dips, as you said, at least more than 5, probably around 10 plus is going to put you in a good position to start doing weighted calisthenics. But the real growth and the real adaptation comes from regression on the skills. You're not just going to magically pop out after you've done all these years of weightlifting and expect to just do straight arm exercises. That's where it's so humbling and so cool as well with calisthenics, because you have to go down this whole new journey of activations, regressions, learning about leverage, changing your posture, and then actually having the patience to be able to stick to it whilst you still do general strength exercise.
Maybe for weighted calisthenics, I can name some numbers. People love numbers. I always love numbers.
I gotcha. Let's get
so maybe in general, one rule of thumb that you can use is if you can do 8 to 9 pull-ups body weight, you very probably can do 6 pull-ups with 2.5 kgs added. So you have like 1 rep is usually around 2.5 kgs more. So if you do 8 reps on day 1 and you do them with 10 kgs, you can do, and you do 6 reps on the other day, you probably can do 15 kgs for 6 reps at the same intensity. There's discrepancies. They become bigger after the 6 rep range. So between the 3 and 6 rep range, the jumps are almost the same for most people from experience. Over the 6 reps, it might be way higher. So some people get super weak after that magical number almost. And under the 3 rep range, the jumps can be bigger. So your single might be 5 kgs or 7.5 or 10 kgs even higher than your 2RM. So these are numbers that you can use for programming and get an idea. Of course, film yourself if the technique changes a lot. If you put a weight on and you see it suffering, you probably need to work on building a few more reps before you start adding weight. But you can actually add weight earlier than most people think if this is done under, like, you film yourself and you make sure that you're not simply compensating rather than anything else. And maybe regarding the skills itself, like with planche, it's easy. You can integrate it in the beginning and you can work on activations. Front lever, for example, it is good to maybe have 6 to 9 pull-ups with 5 to 10 kgs added. Usually a good starting point. You need to hold yourself horizontally. Having a core strength that's decent, maybe a few reps in the one leg of advanced tuck dragon flag, or maybe even a full dragon flag. Never a bad idea. Testing is where it's at compared to traditional strength training. You need to test things. You need to look how they look. You need to see where you're compensating and if you're actually ready to put this in the plan, or you need to wait longer. And maybe the other extreme is the weighted pull-up, where I always tell people the one-arm pull-up, where working on the weighted pull-up is already like 90% of the way to the one-arm pull-up. And here as well, you hear 50%, you hear 60%, 80% of body weight added, being able to pull that. Some people just say 10 pull-ups. I like to be conservative with this one. Between 60% and 100% of body weight is where most people can safely start training towards the one-arm pull-up more specifically. I've seen people with less than 50% body weight added in the pull-up with 2 arms that have an extreme efficiency in the one-arm pull-up and are still able to train it specifically. Here as well, testing is where it's at. You need to recognize as well how someone's moving. If it's smooth, if you see they're strong throughout the whole range of motion, they're not skipping parts of the movement, you can actually start working on the specific, for example, an archer variation with the ring at elbow height earlier, while with others, you will need to work with higher loads, so reach maybe the 80%, even 100% body weight pull-up before testing an archer and integrating this into training. I like to keep that work super technical as well, so very little work on the one-arm pull-up specifically. Most people like to exaggerate it and hurt themselves, their elbows. I feel like it's the one movement I was always super gifted at. So when I started programming it, I had no idea how to do it correctly because I didn't have to fight for it. And only experience over the years taught me that it's not normal to just being able to do 8 one-arm pull-ups per arm. And so I think I'm particularly cautious with this one, but yeah.
Yeah, getting strong at calisthenics is no accident. And I like the advice of not falling into the trap of having to do extremely high reps, because you'll always hear before skills 40, 50 reps on these exercises. And beyond a certain point, it's building predominantly endurance, which is fine if you want to go down the sets and reps, tons of circuits and routines. If that's your flavor of calisthenics, do you? That's fine. But if you're interested in strength skills, I can see that you're choosing things where you can do low reps. It's the basics of adaptation in all strength sports. You need to lift heavy. You got to be challenged for low reps, and doing that in weighted calisthenics allows you to do so because you can add weight to your body and keep challenging yourself in those reps up towards 9, build that strength.
And when looking at skills, when you're learning skills, the first time you're going to hold a straddle planche, it's not going to be in the 15 to 20 seconds range. It's going to be like maximal effort or like slightly submaximal effort. It's always in this super specific strength, very neurological range that has less to do with lactic acid production, metabolites, and so on. So super, super specific to how strongly can you contract a muscle for a very short period of time. And that's where it's at.
100%. And we know that to accomplish general strength with weighted calisthenics, we're doing our pull-ups, dips. We can also integrate in things like pike push-ups, eventually progressing those with weight. We can do our front lever rows as well. What are the other supplementary exercises that you like from the world of free weights?
I like to use everything. So I don't like putting myself into a box. So I do calisthenics. I don't use any weights. Most of the people I work with, I used to be like that. I was scared of weights when I started. That's the reason why I started calisthenics. I just was like,
it can't be calisthenics if it's only, it has to be just bodyweight.
Exactly. Just
2025, boys. Let's go. Let's evolve.
Yeah, exactly. So most of the clients I work with have some row variation in there. To work a tiny bit more on the horizontal lat fibers, to work a tiny bit more on the rhomboids, and work a bit on back thickness, which is great.
Do you like chest support or unsupport? You don't mind?
Generally, chest supported variations, simply because when you start loading your lower back, fatigue's higher, and especially if somebody is training legs as well, which most of the people I work with are going to stress the lower back with a bent over row the day before or 2 days before doing RDL variation, usually isn't great, and just it feels more fatiguing for most people. And the lower back in calisthenics usually simply has the rule to stabilize most things rather than really being the center of force production. So chest supported variations, machines there, unilateral. I love unilateral stuff. Like one arm lat pull downs, vertical, for example, super awesome to hit those iliac lat fibers, which help just connecting. So all the exercises I put in as assistance exercises are there to gab a little bridge when someone's struggling, for example, with certain activations. You can try to cover this, or you can try to simply put more muscle mass in a lacking point and later learn to use this specifically in a skill. Curls, awesome for conditioning, in planche, Bayesian curls or something like that, really working that stretch position, as well as for tricep extensions behind the head, extensions, push downs. Side delt raises more for aesthetic reasons and shoulder health. Not so often. Rather, if somebody says I really have aesthetics as a goal, and yeah, I think this is already like most of the exercises used variations of these as well, and for legs.
How about for pushing type of movements as well?
Personally, I love the dumbbell bench press. That's very personal. I say simply because you can modulate. Yeah, you have more movement of freedom. I feel like you can hit your chest better. And compared to the dip, I'm actually not a super big friend of the dip, especially if somebody is working on planche at the same time, because it's so fatiguing for the shoulder girdle. And I feel like rather than helping performance, especially if we're starting super heavy loaded dips, it often makes it hard for people to be proficient in planche afterwards. So you need to be very careful about how you program the dip and the intensity you program it at. It's not the movement, it's the intensity you program it at the end of the day. And I like to use something where the shoulder blades are simply fixed and you hit the chest a tiny bit more in an isolated way. And I feel like the dumbbell bench press does a great job of that, or the bench press does a great job of that, where the dip does really, like, it's the squat of the upper body. It feels like that as well. It's quite fatiguing for most people.
That's a key point you've raised there as well, about trying not to have too much overlap of exercises. That's probably not spoken about enough, especially in calisthenics and calisthenics combined with weightlifting, because there's so many exercises you have once you've opened your toolbox to include weights. You can get really excited and your workout can have a bunch of stuff in there. But I take it from seeing your stuff, you are more of a calculated decision maker. With each exercise has to have its purpose. You don't just say, oh, dips are good, bench press is good, overhead press is good, let's just put it all in. Well, if you do that, this comes back to step number one. If you are juggling too many things, prepare to stay in beginner purgatory for a long time, because that is often what is holding people back. The only thing I would add to your list, I agree with hitting all the individual muscles and different movement patterns, we can't forget the military press, mate. Surely that's got to be in there.
So military press, beautiful movement. I feel like when, for example, learning the handstand push-up, I very much like, if somebody can't do pike push-ups yet, use, for example, military press or dumbbell military press. I even like dumbbells a tiny bit more, simply because the angle that you're working at and the way you hit the front delt, like at 45-degree angle in front, is a bit more specific to the movement itself. While you often tend to push out the elbows on the side in the military press, I have a bit more mid-delt involvement. You can change it and go a tiny bit more narrow and keep your elbows forward. Works perfectly, especially for the handstand push-up. Though, like in the phase when we're learning the handstand push-up and mastering the handstand push-up, I love weighted pike push-ups. Like, it's an exercise that I've never really seen used before. And honestly, if there's one exercise that I can say I really use with all my clients, is the weighted pike push-up. I didn't learn the handstand push-up like that, but weighted pike push-up, building up with hands on floor, feet on a box that's about at elbow height, knee height, and later full range of motion, and loading this over time. It's just the same movement pattern. You understand how to position your shoulder blades. It's incredible for your front delts, and you can overload it. Like, I have people doing pike push-ups in a 6 to 9 rep range with 30 kgs in full range of motion. And once the handstand push-up is learned, like at a certain point, of course, you can't load the pike push-up anymore. It becomes very difficult with weight vest and a weight belt. Military press gives you infinite possibilities to keep going. In a first phase, I've noticed that people struggle with the handstand push-up when combining the two because of the two different movement patterns. Noticed it very, very often. Usually you get used to it after a first phase, and you might just insert one once a week, and you keep the pike push-up the other day, so to say, while you do handstand push-ups as well, just to have a bit of a smoother transition. And yeah, golden exercise, absolutely love it. One of my favorites.
The difficulty I've found with the pike push-up is keeping it objective, because there's a pike push-up and there's a pike push-up, if you know what I'm saying. You can cheat it, rock back onto your heels, and measuring progress with that, given that you can compensate, can sometimes be hard to manage. How do you keep this honest with pike push-up intensity?
So by starting with certain standards. So for example, setting the box always at knee height. So if you're standing on the floor, you set it up on knee height. If you use parallettes, you stand on the parallettes and set it up at knee height. Having the same distance, so having like a guiding line somewhere between the box and the parallettes is extremely important. And of course, by like getting video feedbacks every single week, because I review the videos of the clients every single week, it's easy for them with time to know when they're doing it right and when they're doing it wrong, because they get corrected constantly. But 100%, it's a big struggle, and it's one of the movement people struggle with the most. Other things you can look at is where your shoulders are going, where you're looking at. So making like a fixed point between the parallettes where you always are gonna touch with the nose, making sure that you keep looking at it, which helps for the handstand push-ups later, because people tend to bring the head in, for example, and when they start doing handstand push-up and they bring the head in, they lose balance. So keep looking at that spot. Look where your shoulders are compared to your wrists in the bottom position of the bike push-up, so you're not too close or not too far away. Things like that will make sure that over time your form will become more objective, look always the same, the form always being the same, and not flatten out with the chest too much. So when you start pushing out, that you do rather a push-up. And by slowly progressing and noticing, hey, I'm compensating, no more adding weight. You repeat this next week. You focus on making this better before you actually start loading them more.
Those are great technical concentration points for pike push-up, I'll also add just making it as hard as possible. Because with calisthenics, especially these pike push-ups, assisted one-arm chin-ups, you have a rep range. Make it as physically hard as possible so you're struggling within that rep range. Because if you approach it with that mindset, you almost take care of elbow and shoulder position, body mechanics, because you're chasing the difficult. And that's what separates calisthenics from just general lifting weights, is you have to make it hard, because you can easily change the environment of your body to offload tension. And it's what separates people.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the difference once you do a handstand push-up and you have learned to keep your shoulders slightly externally rotated and some tension in the lats. You'll be nice and solid in the bottom position. If you haven't learned this happens and you fall down and you keep trying and years pass and you don't understand what's the missing link.
Last thing with using weights to help supplement your handstand push-up journey, with a purely overhead press versus, say, a high incline, do you notice any difference there? Because I bring this up, the handstand push-up freestanding isn't a purely vertical, straight, upright press flared. You've got more of essentially like a high incline. So I'm just wondering what exercise selection and the justification you'd have for a high incline versus a purely upright back.
I would say high incline is stability. It will help you to load a tiny bit more. It's the thing with specificity. So if you start like looking and trying to make every movement as similar as possible to the end exercise, like at the end you should be doing dumbbell military presses. There's in principle two types of transfer. There's three, but the third one is impossible to really prove in research. One is you do the same movement and it has a carryover. And the second one is you build muscle and then later learn to use it specifically in a movement. So honestly, I like to change variations over time. A high incline is gonna take away like the lower back fatigue. It's gonna take away the risk of kicking a tiny bit with the legs, so little compensations. You can focus more on the movement itself, like at an 80-degree incline, it's perfect. You might even be able to hit the front delt better in some ways. You might though be able to bring the chest in a tiny bit more and compensate through that a tiny bit more. So there's always upside and downsides, but at the end of the day, if you've been training for years, having a phase and you get stuck in the military press, having a phase where you use high incline for 6 months to even a year, and then going back to the military press, variation is great, keeps neuroplasticity high, so other forms of adaptations that are not super specific, like you do in powerlifting in a GPP, so general preparation phase, and then later go back to the more specific movement you're actually interested in, and we'll see improvements in performance because you keep your brain nice and fresh and don't do always the exact same thing all the time, where it's great for a while, we get specifically stronger, but with time, it has been seen that performance starts to drop because you get lazy, so to say, in a certain way.
Do you want to master calisthenics? Fitness FAQ's training programs will help you build muscle and get stronger with bodyweight training. Use the code podcast20 at checkout to save 20% when shopping at fitnessfaqs.com. So we know we're going to be doing our weighted calisthenics. We're going to be doing some key compound lifts with weights, maybe sprinkling in some isolations. The $1 million question: how do we combine skills and weighted calisthenics and lifting weights, this triad, this perfect trio that we'd all love to combine?
Okay, let's go from little to big. So from day structure to weekly structure to mesocycle/macrocycle structure. I structure a day like this. You start with a technical component, so the skills component. You need to be fresh for that. It's fun. you work on activations, and you work with a big margin. This means that you have a lot of seconds in reserve or reps in reserve, so you can really focus on what you're actually doing and focus on the activation side. You will have progression in this technical component, but we maybe can look at this in detail later, how I would really program this skill component. So you do your planches, you do your front levers, for example. And you start out your workout with that. Then you move on to compound movement, as you mentioned, that involve the primary movers that you are using in the skills. So if you're doing front lever, you might be doing weighted pull-ups. If you're doing planche, you might be doing a military press or pike push-ups or anything that hits the front delt. And not to forget what a lot of people in calisthenics like to do, the chest as well, more for aesthetic reasons or stability reasons than anything else. But I feel programming-wise, the difficult thing in calisthenics is front delts and chest, because they're so overlapping and you usually have to divide them between 2 days. And people just like, once they've reached X push-ups, they're like, I don't need this anymore, and they take them away from the plan, and they always have chicken breasts besides if they do like heavy dips or stuff like that.
That's a fact right there. You don't want to be lagging in the chest department, boys. It'll bite you later.
Yeah, exactly. And like, especially when you're training a lot of planche and you always have this super kyphotic position, always super closed in your thoracic spine, you rarely tap into actually getting a nice stretch and really working on the chest. So parenthesis closed. You do the compound movements where you hit the primary movers of the skills, which you can very nicely objectively periodize over time and overload over time. And then you switch to the accessory work. This can be super specific to certain weak points for skills. For example, learning the right position of the hip in the planche. So super low intensity, actually very specific to really understanding and learning the right position. Doesn't cost a lot of strength. Or, of course, muscular accessories for lacking muscle groups, or to prepare yourself for further skills. Like if you know that one day you will be doing iron crosses, starting conditioning your elbows and biceps the right way is never a bad idea. And doing your curls, doing exactly like stretch variations, preacher curls, different variations of curls, which are great for shoulder health as well, or working on your tricep if it's lacking and you notice like it's one of the problem, always great. So this is how I would structure the day. This means I don't really have like push or pull split generally. If you're combining multiple skills at once, it rarely makes sense because there are so many overlapping muscle groups, and I would rather focus on getting enough skills in, and like getting the right volume in the skills in, and making sure that I divide them smartly over the week so I get into every session fresh. Weekly structure, the frequency of the skills that I'm working on, as well as the other movements, 2 to max 3 times a week. Very rarely 3 times a week. 2 times a week is more than enough for most movements. If we're really having troubles with activations, we might do one day in the middle day, so to say, that's extremely technical, where we can learn certain activations, but we keep it under an RP 7, so super easy. And things like handstands 3 times a week is a good sweet spot for most. Rarely more, of course, when we're talking about super advanced athletes, elite athletes that work on planche press, planche push-up, multis, whatever it is at the same time, you will be doing these movements at 4 times a week. There's no way around it, but at that point, you'll be able to tank the volume without a problem, because you'll have to have adapted to it. Otherwise, you're going to break. Moving on to the mesocycle structure, there are differences in how I program skills and weighted. To make it super short skills, you can't add seconds every single week. You can start with a 3 times 6 and then go to a 3 times 7, 3 times 8, 3 times 10. it doesn't work, besides if you're super gifted. Weighted, you are able to either add reps in a rep range on accessories. Usually that's how I like to go about it. So auto-regulate it with RPE and have a rep range, so we make sure that we get the best out of every single set. And weighted wise, if you start with enough margin, you'll be able to add weight every single week, at least to one of the sets of the things you're doing. In skills, where it's in adding sets. And that's what most people really get wrong when working on skills. You can't add seconds, but you can easily add sets.
Is that relative to the intensity of your maximum and then just trying to accrue more volume?
Exactly. So the way you can go about it, numbers again, yay, is, for example, you test your one leg advanced tuck front lever. And your max is lays between 6 and 8 seconds, let's say. Very solid form. After the 7-second mark, you start losing your hips a bit, you start losing your shoulder blades a bit. You take about 1/3 of that. So around 2 seconds. Most people, here there's individual differences, but most people will be able to do 3 to 4 sets of 2 seconds if they take around 2 minutes of break in between with very high quality. So if you can do a one leg advanced tuck front lever for 6 seconds, you can do a 3x2 in your program. In the first week. And then you might have a back off with an easier variation where you hold it for more seconds. These 3x2 seconds, they will be very high quality. You will be very focused on your activations. And in the second week, you'll do a 4x2. If the intensity, like if you have enough seconds in reserve after the 3x2, then a 5x2, a 6x2, maybe even a jump to an 8x2. Repetition. You keep repeating the movement. You have an enormous margin, and you will be able to do an 8x2 without a problem after 4 weeks of work, which equals to 16 seconds of gathered volume, so to say. You will be testing your one leg advanced tuck front lever again in the deload, for example. You will notice how very probably your hold time will have gone up by a few seconds. In the next mesocycle, you can start with a 3x3 or even 3x4 and repeat the same thing again. At a certain point, if you've built enough margin, so enough theoretical seconds you can hold this progression for, you can allow yourself to do an intensification mesocycle where you actually are more aggressive about adding seconds to this movement and then testing the new propedeutic in the deload. So this is a very methodical way about training skills. It sounds like absolute math. In real life, it is maybe for the first months of working with someone, later on not, and there's big individual differences. But this is the way I go about skills, and it's the way how you can create enough margin, enough buffer, so you can focus on activations, you can focus on form, and you have the possibility to improve over time.
With skills, is it important to choose something that you can fail around 10-ish seconds as opposed to a skill that you can hold for, say, 30 seconds in terms of what you choose for your regular programming?
Absolutely. So everything above the 12-second threshold very often, you can use it as a back-off, so to say. So you do your 6x2 seconds one leg advanced tuck front lever. Then as a second exercise, you do 2 sets of an advanced tuck front lever, for example, which you can probably hold for 12 to 15 seconds when you're fresh, but after the 4x2, you'll be a tiny bit tired, and you'll be able to hold it in the 7 to 10 seconds range easily, while keeping enough seconds in reserve there to gather enough volume in this movement, because just doing a 4x2 is not enough to improve for most. But by adding this extra volume, high quality volume without high intensity, yes. So I would choose variations where you are in the 6 to 9 seconds range as your primary movement, and as a backoff, maybe in the 9 to 12 or 9 to 15 seconds range, with the propedeutics getting harder over time. Like a straddle planche, the whole time that you will be able to do in tests are gonna be shorter. So it's probably around the 4 to 6 seconds rather. And with the full planche, 2 to 4 seconds. And you will still be able to integrate it in the plan because at that point it becomes super neurological, super intense, and the whole times won't be long. And only later in your career, once you feel super confident in this movement, the training is gonna go rather in the direction of adding seconds. And if you look at the Burning Gate competitions in Italy, for example, almost endurance training for skills.
But Denis, I've heard that just training skills to failure is the best way to make fast progress. Can you talk to me about why that might not be the smartest idea?
Well, have you tried doing your 1RM bench press every single day, every single time you go to the gym?
Yeah, that's how everyone trains to make really rapid gains.
I feel, what was it, like a few months ago, a study came out where there was an older study at some point, but they tested this again. And the result was the gains were quite incredible. Like people improved a lot because specificity is so high. Most people can do more than they think they can. And the downside of this study was that 40%, I think, or even more, of the people participating in the study got injured.
They never talk about this like sustainability. It's always romanticized. Oh yeah, I'm training hard. I'm hardcore every set. You're leaving some reps in the reserve. You're like leaving whole time on the table. I'm training harder than you. I'm more hardcore. But that's not how it works.
Yeah, the big problem is that the people that are successful on Instagram, the 0.1% that you see doing this crazy stuff, it's exactly how they got there because they have the genetics for it. Meaning if they go to failure at every single set, they will have enough margin anyway to recover from it and improve. The truth is that for mere normal human mortals, it's not possible. If you try that, you might improve very quickly for a while, you'll hit a wall, you'll get injured, and it's not worth it. And it's not the way that you program strength training. Of course, my way of seeing training is maybe a very methodical one, and people think, oh, calisthenics is going to the park, trying out stuff, having fun, enjoyment. And it used to be for me as well, but my job is making people better and making people that have tried for 5+ years achieving these skills and not managing to actually get them a chance to achieve them. And the only way to do so is by being extremely methodical and leaving enough reps in reserve to be able to focus on the technique, not just trying, shit forming everything and then fixing form later. It's like, doesn't work for most people.
You're not able to be objective either. Your going to failure is the only lever that you can pull. We're not discounting that hard work is important, but structured, calculated hard work in the right doses really can be the ultimate plateau buster, or at least long-term sustainable progress, because we're not machines. Even the people training to failure all the time are auto-regulating things too. And they do this in ways where they don't even know that they're doing it. They'll drop a set or two. They'll take a rest day by accident and then just have maybe a week of just lighter volume and slightly less intensity. That's not even failure, but they don't talk about that online.
Beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. So, and yeah, the other point, of course, like talk about keeping margin all the time. Over the weeks, you will go always more intense, always closer to failure, building up fatigue, building up fitness, and then at a certain point, you will be exhausted, fatigued, and you deload, you super compensate, and you start again, the whole process. And this is the way to go.
That might have seemed complicated, what you just said, but I really like how you broke it down so simply with the structure of skills, compounds, accessories, activations. You fit it into that mold, and it goes against some people's approach of making it more complicated. I'm going to do push-pull legs or skills, upper, separating these different type of things. It's nice knowing that you can combine them in a session and still make progress. It's not as if you have to treat these skills like some separate entity. You're still training the prime mover muscles, and it makes sense that you put them at the start, followed by equivalent exercise that build up strength, muscle mass, and they feed into each other. But in calisthenics, people want shortcuts. People want fast progress. We all do. We'd love to know if there was a magical exercise or something that we can do to speed up progress. Speaking to you, I get the feeling that there might not be some magic secrets. What should we focus on?
Yeah, there's no secret exercise. There might be one exercise that really covers the gap, really hits something that you weren't able to tap in before or activate before, where you're like, dude, this really helped me progress, and that's awesome. But usually it's about keeping your ego in check, being patient, and just really taking a step back, understanding the movement, understanding what muscles are actually needed to achieve the skills, and working on these things, rather than looking for the magic variation. It, as the first words in the podcast, it lays in consistency in working precisely and having an objective parameters about, am I progressing or am I not? And understanding what your weakest link is and working on that, but you'll always be as strong as your weakest link.
Because we'll look at exercises like the planche or the front lever and then think that some dumbbell raises for anterior adults, instant progression on the planche, or some cable pull downs, pullovers, they're going to help build up that strength for that. It's not to say they're useless. It's just that they should make up that end part of your routine. It's not going to be the mainstay. The mainstay should be what you want to do.
Exactly. Specificity.
And it's about choosing the exercise for your level. We're going to get people that are excited to do the skills. They might be training something that they can barely hold for a second, which is one camp. But you'll also get people that are just chilling in something, the band planche example, where it's a thick, heavy band. They're holding a full planche for 20 seconds. They get out. It's not like they've tried or anything. That's something that I'd like you to pinpoint a little bit more and put some highlight to about, I guess, checking the ego as well. Because I've worked with people, I've seen a lot of people where you can just tell straight away, you got to take a step back. As in, you take that step back and then you'll get 2 steps forward. Can you talk to that philosophy?
Yes. When I have the call with a potential new client, it's always, so we are extremely strict about technique. And this is not because we're like obsessed with form. It's because we need objective parameters to measure your progress. Number one. Secondly, once you reach this skill, you actually want it to look like the skill and you don't want it to look like something else. And it does break people's hearts. They've worked for 5 years and they're like, I can straddle planche. I see the video, or like when they write, I can straddle planche for like 3 seconds. Maybe the form isn't the best. I let them test the tuck planche, the advanced tuck planche, and maybe the advanced tuck planche even with a loop band, just to see where they're at, and the straddle planche to give it a look and be like, yeah, no, there's just a few things we need to work on. We need to take this step back. And why is this so important? It's so important because once you need to have a variation that is easy enough that you can actually focus on the weak points. You need to be able to focus on the missing links. If the intensity is too high and you're holding on for your dear life, you can't think of anything. You're just contracting every muscle maximally as much as possible, like trembling like a crazy dude. No, you need to be able to focus on these little details, take in the feedbacks, apply the feedbacks, get stronger where it's missing, and you will get to that point. Taking this step back will, with time, always be worth it. I haven't had one occasion with hundreds and hundreds of people I worked where people were upset that they lost a few months working on certain details because the end goal now looks like exactly what they wanted it to look like. And it takes time, it takes patience, and it sucks. Like, honestly, it sucks to take that step back. And it doesn't mean that you need to take a step back. If things are looking great, like, keep going. You have these cases as well, people holding themselves back because they're looking at every single little detail. Like I've talked in a podcast with Gabo, for example. He was so obsessed with his scapulas. Like, I can't hold the protraction like you can. It's like, I gave a workshop at his gym, and I looked at his scapulas, and just anatomically, his scaps are mini. They're like, just anatomically, their structure is very, very little, and you need way more muscle to stabilize those. Well, if you, for example, just have big scaps, it's way easier to stabilize those. It's way easier to keep that protracted form that is purely aesthetic for the most part, and everyone wants in planche. So there's so many differences, and only a trained eye can understand. And even for a trained eye, after years and years, it's sometimes difficult to pinpoint where the problem is. But you have to accept certain things at some point.
Your analogy earlier in this chat about the equivalent of a max hold in calisthenics on a front lever or a planche, it's like testing your 1RM on a squat, bench, or deadlift. And just picture that scenario. You can't be working on your technical cues and activation of different areas under maximum load. You can think about it all you want in your head, but physically it's beyond your threshold. It's testing you at that maximum level. And this is where, for regular training, people are testing their strength too often. They're getting poor quality practice, building poor movement patterns, not strengthening the right areas. Whereas what they should do is build their strength, as you said, with those parameters of hold times at a level that does suit what you can actually do. Pay your dues. Work through that 4 to 6 week mesocycle, whatever your plan is. Then you can test. Then you can see the fruits of your labor and what has actually come to fruition.
Exactly. That's, I feel like, a big difference between traditional strength sports and calisthenics, maybe. You do want to test quite frequently at the end of the day to see if the work that you're doing is actually leading to progress or not, especially when working with multiple sets at low seconds. So high, like you do a lot of sets, short holds. Is this work that I'm actually doing really helping me to progress in what I want to? And you can test in your deload week. You need to test it to see if you're making progress in absolute intensities and not only in relative intensities. An absolute intensity in a skill is the maximum you can hold it in your progression that you're currently able to work on. The relative intensity is how intense you're training easier progression, for example, or compared to what the easier progression's max is. So if you're doing your advanced duck front lever for 4 seconds, and then you improve it to 10 seconds, but your one leg advanced duck, which is the actual thing you're working on, is not improving, you're doing something wrong. So checking your testing quite frequently. You don't need to test every deload, but checking in with yourself, seeing, is this actually leading to progress? Yes or no? Super important. While in traditional strength sport, you usually rarely test your 1RM, so to say, more than a few times a year. If you're competing, you'll test it when you do the competition 3 to 4 times a year, or even just 2 times a year.
And that testing works both ways, because if you're saying to Coach Denis, yeah, I could straddle planche, but you're saying your numbers when you had a highly specialized program that was 8 months ago, you haven't trained the planche since then, those numbers are almost meaningless. And then the regular testing actually allows you to base these second holds off some more acute, realistic indicators of your level of fitness.
That's a big thing. in coaching, I feel like someone's writing someone a program, it's super important you test everything before. You look how are things looking, because technique plays such a huge role in calisthenics and in progressing. Like, besides how you periodize the plan, the first months of a coaching, and this is why you see incredible results by maybe some coaches that have zero idea of how to periodize a plan correctly, but they're good technique-wise because they're super good athletes, and they come out with incredible results in 2 weeks. You haven't done anything in these 2 weeks. You've given him clues. He improved his form, but it was actually all him in the years before that led to this progress. And only after 6 months, a year of working together, when you start hitting plateaus where the details, where the actual programming comes into play, that's where you see the real results. That's where you see if someone's capable to program something or not.
And people need to understand that about the rate of progress in calisthenics, because you can't think, if you've been training for a year or two, that how fast you can make gains will be like that of a beginner. It sounds so obvious, but we forget this, and we can often compare how quick we started learning the initial stages to our current level. Geez, I'm so close to that straddle, but I can't get it. That's why, because you're an intermediate and progress slows down.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, with the topic of skills, there is holds as well as dynamics. So you can do isometrics for your front levers and your planches, but then you can also do raises and eccentrics. What should people know about the differences for those types of training?
Here as well, on social media, you often see like a debate, what's better or what's worse. And I don't like that. It's all a toolbox. So when periodizing skills, it's super important that we're working with objective parameters and that the things look as close or the same as possible throughout the sets and throughout the weeks. Dynamic progressions, so a race, ice cream maker, whatever it is, brings a further layer of complexity to this, because you move your body dynamically and you have way more ways to compensate. So what I like to do is rather divide advantages of dynamic skills and disadvantages, and then depending on that, decide. So advantages of dynamic variations are that you can train a muscle over a bigger range of motion. Pure isometric, even though it's the most specific way to train a skill, trains a muscle in a 15 to 20% degree. While if you go through the whole range of motion, you'll train the muscle over a bigger range of motion. More hypertrophy, more gains. If the form really is perfect, it is easier to count reps compared to seconds to measure progress. And it can be a great way to scale intensity if we're not progressing in an isometric, or gap a bridge between propedeutics. I'm struggling with the one leg. Maybe I can hold the one leg advanced up front lever for 12 seconds, which is for most people more than enough to really start trying to work on the half lay, but no chance on the half lay. Doing one leg advanced leg front lever pulls, doing raises to holds, super important. I never see dynamics as a way to gap a bridge from one propedeutic to the next by jumping into the skills uncontrolled, just touching a second and going away. It's about actually using an easier variation usually than the one that we're currently training at, controlling it over the whole range of motion, understanding maybe some activations that are harder to understand in an isometric alone, because if you raise into a front lever, for example, you will really need to learn to depress your shoulder blades, bring some tension into lats to lift up your hips. Or if you have the tendency to lose the hips as a first thing, doing pulls where you create tension over the lats and you drive the hips upwards, extremely useful to understand these activations in particular. So awesome toolbox as well to maintain skills over time. So you don't go in and you do 12 seconds hold every single time. Just doing 2 sets of full front lever pulls so pulls is horizontal up and down again, so not a pull up, is usually enough to maintain the front lever. And then if you test isometric, you'll be able to hold it for 10 seconds like you used to. And yeah, the disadvantages of these dynamic skills is very often people just ice cream maker into a front lever and they think that's going to make them progress.
Momentum instead of using their brute strength to pull them through the range.
Exactly. There's more ways to cheat. They're more complex. So if you are not objective yourself, or you don't have someone looking over them, there's 10,000 little things you can do to make it easier. And we usually have to use a regression of the skill that we're currently working on, which means it's a tiny bit less specific, can be seen as a disadvantage here. It depends on the individual case.
That was almost word for word how I would answer the same question if you were asking me. The only thing that I'd add after hearing such a nice, elaborate and eloquent answer is that those dynamics, don't rush into doing them too soon. For most people that are just early on their journey, build that static strength, get the right activation in a less dynamically skillful environment so that you can build up your body. But then, afterwards, you've got up a decent level, you're edging towards those half lay type of positions. It makes sense because then you can do tucked dynamic variations and actually do enough reps to make them productive, not just some all-out grit your teeth, 1 rep max type of thing if it's strict.
Exactly, where you compensate and you actually hurt your progress rather than helping yourself.
If our goal is calisthenics, how important is building muscle mass to make us strong and well-rounded?
Difficult question. Very difficult question, because in general, the greater the cross-sectional area we have, the more muscle we have, the more potential we have for specific force production, especially when we learn to recruit these muscles efficiently through proper neural activations. That is a fact. But the big problem in calisthenics is that it's always relative to our body weight. It's relative strength. And if you look at powerlifting, you can see how far you can get, how far you can bring these specific neural activations. You can see athletes in the minus 66 kg category. They stay in the minus 66, but every single year they hit PRs and they get better. And they're lean as hell when they go to the competition. If they would be leaner, their performance would drop drastically. So don't underestimate how much you can do without building muscle. And that's what you see very often in actually quite skinny, super skills specific athletes. The heavier you are, the bigger you are, the more muscle mass you will need. And I feel like muscle mass is always, it's a joker. So maybe you start working with somebody, you see they're lacking in muscle mass to begin with, building muscle mass, number one priority, 100%. But if they have a decent muscle mass, they will build it anyway by doing a plan like we mentioned before, doing enough volume and training with the right intensity. And we can use maybe once they get stuck for a certain skill, really try to have a phase where we put more muscle on the prime movers, and that's super important, of a certain skills that we want to achieve. Maybe stay in a very slight surplus without exaggerating, like putting excessive fat on ourselves is not useful in calisthenics. Then having a little cutting phase to gap this bridge and finally manage the straddle planche. So tool in the toolbox as well. And in the first years, important. As an intermediate, probably overrated. As an advanced, might be the solution to break a plateau. That's how I would see it.
For the skill specialist, it makes sense to be lighter and leaner factoring in your total body weight, even if that includes muscle mass, it's just going to make it easier for you to hold those positions with all the leverage components of defying gravity. Makes sense. It's what we see in the real world too. I would say for the street lifter, weighted calisthenics enjoyer, makes sense for these key compound movements, full range of motion, where it's a little bit less leverage based, like a dip and a pull up. It matters, but it doesn't matter as much as holding your body horizontal against gravity. And the key takeaway, muscle in the prime movers, makes so much sense. In the upper body, essentially, we could simplify it, because there was a really interesting, skip legs. We're saying it here on the show because I came across this fascinating study, was on distance runners, and how they compared people, and the running economy was different based on where the distribution of mass was on their body. So for people that had more weight towards their calves, distally on the body, even if they had a similar body weight, just that proportion alone affected their running economy. And you can think about that in things like planches and front levers. You chuck on some ankle weights, changes the game, even if it's a few hundred grams or kilos. So moral of the story is here, if you've been blessed with genetic calves, you're not going to get called out because you got skinny calves, but you're not going to be able to hold front levers and planches as easy.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's still, I don't understand why after all these years, this big debate about training legs in calisthenics. It's your decision. It's about priorities. If you want to learn skills, your best bet is to train the least legs possible. I'm sorry. That's the way. If you want to train legs, great, but take into account that it's going to cause more fatigue during training, number one. Secondly, heavier legs, harder leverage. For the first 8 years of my training career, I didn't train legs. I used to compete in skills competitions. I had all my mass in the upper body. If you look at the highest elite athletes in the sport, they usually, if they're 170 centimeters, they usually weigh around 60 kgs. So 170 minus like 110, like this 10 kg to centimeters difference is what you usually see in, and when you start training legs, usually you will be at 170 to 70 kgs and still be a good point for skills. If it goes above that, you will make it incrementally harder and harder and harder to learn these skills for yourself. Just to have some numbers again.
The goals are so important. Yeah, I agree. You really have to know within yourself what brings you the most value and joy, not just what you think should be done. If people say that you should skip legs, just have the best skills, but you want to be well-rounded, decent, muscle mass and strength there, all the benefits we have for falls prevention. We can go on and on with respect to that. It doesn't have to be an all nothing thing. You don't have to skip legs entirely. You can just put in the smallest amount of work and most minuscule progressive overload, and you won't get the consequences of extreme fatigue. If you're going balls deep on legs, deadlifts, heavy squats, once or twice a week, you just won't progress yourself as fast as the alternate version of you that's either skipping legs or doing the minimum effective dose.
Absolutely. And there are people that go around and say, I can do this, so you can do it too. Like I can squat so and do planches as well. The other coach at Sthenics, Leo, for example, can squat 200 kgs, has over 10 seconds of full planche. Like he is blessed with not being he doesn't build a lot of muscle mass. He has a very hard time building muscle mass. And this is a great advantage to be able to actually do both. And it's all genetics. Like being able to do this is super, super rare. Otherwise, you would see it way more often.
That genetics thing, and you also can't be the best at every single thing, has to be highlighted, because we're on social media. Everyone's stronger than us at every single possible way. Everyone seems to have better combinations of everything, but keep in mind that they don't do everything to the highest possible level. There might be a genetic outlier that can do several things, but for the average, most of us are average. We've got to work with what we've got. We've got to be dedicated and also realistic, because thinking that you can do things that aren't realistic is a surefire way to not enjoy your training.
Exactly.
Denis, that was an awesome chat, mate. Where can people learn more about your stuff if they want to follow you?
So we have an Instagram page. It's called Sthenics _ Can check that out. YouTube channel as well. We don't post super regularly on YouTube, but we try to, and we do case studies there, which people enjoy a lot. Take our clients, go through the whole progress, what we've done to make them achieve these things, and we have a tracking app as well. It's called TrainLog, and you can find it on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you so much for having me.
If you found this video helpful, you're going to love what's next right over here.